Hey folks, welcome back to Extreme IE. In this video, we're going to start taking a look at how we can segment our data center, and we're going to use Cisco Tetration to do that. The reason we're going to use Tetration is because we want to be able to begin segmenting our data center easily without making a ton of infrastructure changes. In fact, Tetration is going to be able to do it without making any infrastructure changes. We also want to be able to use the ability within Tetration to create dynamic policies. So prod can only talk to prod, or P2 can only talk to P2, and we don't want to constantly be married to filtering out what those IP addresses are that we're going to allow or deny. We want to be able to use the ability to label different kinds of traffic and let Tetration manage this for us on its own. We also want to make sure that we don't break anything. What do I mean by that? Well, I have a jump box here, and this jump box has access to my finance application. So there's a couple things that I can't do. I can't break my jump box's ability to get to my environment, to log into things. I also cannot break the way that the application actually functions. So when we're done doing this, when we're done segmenting, we need to make sure that this application still functions. We need to make sure that the jump box still has access to manage the data center resources that it currently manages. And at the same time, we need to begin actually creating some policies to segment the data center. In fact, that's why we have this, right? So let's go ahead and jump into it. So on my left-hand menu here, I'm going to go to segmentation. That kind of makes sense, right? Because we're trying to segment the data center. And there's a number of different ways that I can begin to approach this challenge or this problem or project. I'm not going to show you one way because that would be pointless. I want to show you the capabilities of this system, and I'm going to show you a couple different ways to begin addressing this. Now, you'll notice on the right-hand side that there's kind of a wizard that I can go through. I can create filter, add a policy, and analyze, and then enable enforcement. There's one concept that I want to get across to you guys before I do that, though. And that's the idea of an application workspace. I think all of us have logged into a firewall before, and we've seen just a ton of rules that aren't labeled correctly, or they don't have a description on them. We don't really know what they do, and all we see is IP to IP with a permit and a port, right, and a port protocol. Tetration operates based on an idea of what we call a workspace, where every rule set, every group of rules, every application is going to have a workspace. So when I want to go and start segmenting production, I'm going to create a workspace called production. And all the rules that affect how production interacts with other production machines, they're going to be within that workspace. When I go to do the same thing for development, I'm going to create another one for development. And so as I begin to build out my environment, these workspaces are going to help me to manage those different rule sets. And then Tetration on the back end is going to be able to manage how those different workspaces or applications have interdependencies and need to react to one another. So if I have 1,000 different applications, I'm going to have 1,000 workspaces, a rule set for each application. Tetration will manage how those different rule sets need to interact with each other and let me know where I need to make changes rather than me trying to figure out where I need to make changes. So let me just show you quickly how we can create some quick filters here. So I'm going to go ahead and say inventory filter. The reason why I'm saying inventory filter is because I want Tetration to search through my entire data center. Okay, I've already deployed my sensors, so my shared services, my jump boxes, Active Directory, my finance app that I just showed you, all have sensors already deployed. I've already done integration with ICE. So I'm already pulling in security group tags or SGTs. I'm already pulling in data from vCenter and from my ServiceNow. I'm already pulling in data from my load balancers. So all of that setup and integration is done. And so what I want to do is I'm going to ask Tetration to search through all of that information that without Tetration would be individual attributes and individually housed or databases, individually housed databases of information. And I'm going to ask Tetration to search through all of it to find me my production systems. Now, when I click on query here, I can click this this question mark box, left click on it, and it'll pin the window here. You can see that I have a lot of information that I can ask Tetration. I can search for if a host name contains something, right? If the host name contains prod, then I want it in this bucket. If it's on a certain subnet, I want it in this bucket. If the operating system is a certain OS, I want it in this bucket. Maybe there's a certain package inventory that I'm looking for. If it has this version of antivirus and it's got this version of VMware tools and it's got, this specific build or whatever, then I want it in this bucket. So there's a lot of out-of-the-box information that I can add. And then, of course, I have the third-party info that I'm feeding into Tetration from my ServiceNow, from vCenter. So maybe the application name, maybe the country it lives in, maybe what data center it's in? What's the environment? Is it production or is it dev? Am I pulling in any security group tags or SGTs from ICE that may help me label what I'm looking for? So I can ask Tetration for all of these different kinds of information, all these different attributes, and have Tetration dynamically and automatically put the workloads or the servers into this bucket. Now, in my case here, we're going to start off simple. We're going to create some creative ones later on. For here, I'm just going to create something simple. So I'm going to say Tetration, search through my entire lab, search through my entire data center, and find something that's production. We'll say next. Tetration says, hey, here are the 8 servers that you have considered production. Here are their host names, IP addresses, and their operating system. Awesome. I'm going to say create filter. Now, I also have a P2 environment. So I'm going to say inventory filter again, and I want to create one for my P2 environment. So we'll say PII. Now, if I go ahead and I click this box again, if I search through and I look, I'll see that I have a label for P2. One of the things I want to point out here about Tetration is we don't limit you to a small scale of labels. We allow you to have up to 32 different labels or identifying attributes for your servers. And that's a lot of labels. You can start feeding this VLAN information, network segments, whatever you want to do, what firewall it's behind. I mean, you have up to 32 different options that you can leverage for your servers, and you can pick and choose which ones you want. You can create these as you see fit. So, whoops, I didn't want to print. I hit the wrong button. So we'll say P2 equals, and we're looking for true. So anything out my entire lab that is considered P2 compliant, we want a list of that. And Tetration says, here you go. We'll say create filter. Now that's a way that I can start working through this process. But I want to go ahead and I want to do this another way as well. I'm going to create a workspace for myself. And we're going to say global info sec policies. And we're going to say global for the description. I don't have to put one, but global DC rules. We'll say create. Now these rules are going to blanket, they're going to umbrella my entire data center. And for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and say absolute policies. In other words, these are the God rules of my data center. They are the absolute policies that cannot be broken in my data center. So if somebody comes along, they're not paying attention, they create a rule for maybe just finance that's underneath my data center. If they create rules that violate this specific policy, Tetration won't allow it, because these are absolute policies that must be adhered to. So I'm going to go ahead and say add manual policies. Now you can see here that Tetration does have the ability to automatically discover policies. I'm not going to do that in this case because I'm not trying to figure out an application. We would use this if we didn't know our environment, if we didn't know how production was accessing production. We might use this because we're trying to figure out how an application acts with other applications. In this case, again, I'm creating some high-level management rules. I want my jump box to be able to always have access regardless what's generated automatically down the line. So I'm going to say add manual policies. So what I want to do first is I want to allow production to always access production. Now remember that Tetration operates based on a whitelist. So the catch-all is going to be deny. If I don't allow it, it's not going to be allowed, period. So I have to specifically allow what I want in my data center. This is what we would call zero trust. So I'll say okay, and I need to give it a port. So here, because we're not micro-segmenting yet, because we're not diving into how a specific database server might access a specific web server, we're just going to allow prod to talk to prod. And I can validate this if I want to. If I click on prod, that filter, you'll notice on the right-hand side, the window changes. It lets me know what I'm searching for and what workloads are considered production. I'm going to add another absolute policy, and we're going to say P2. And we're going to say OK. And again, we're going to allow any transaction on any port between our P2 environment. As we dive deeper into the applications within P2, yes, we're absolutely going to limit what they can and can't do. Yes, we're absolutely going to limit what ports and protocols can and cannot be, what transactions can go in between the database server and the web server. But for now, at a high level across the entire data center, we don't want these environments interacting with each other. We don't want development getting to P2. We don't want tests to get to prod. So we're only going to allow production workloads to talk to production. We're only going to allow P2 to talk to P2. Now, I have another problem. I have my jump box. So I've already gone in and I've created a filter called Guacamole, but again, I have an issue. My issue is that I do not want to allow my jump box to be able to access everything on every port. Obviously, I want to limit my jump box being allowed to access, because what if my jump box gets compromised? I only want it to be able to access my Linux servers via SSH. I don't want people to use Telnet, just SSH. I also only want my jump box to be able to reach my Windows servers on 3389. In other words, I don't want my jump box to hit a Windows server using SSH. How do I do that? Well, I forgot to create the filters in the other screen. That's okay, because Tetration is built for user ease. In other words, it's easy to operationalize and easy to navigate to where I can create filters on the fly. I can create groupings on the fly as I work through my segmentation process. We'll say create new filter, and I'm going to build a filter based on Microsoft Windows. And I'm going to do this across my entire lab again. And I'm going to do this based on two different things. So we'll say OS equals, and we'll say MS Windows. We'll hit enter. And I'm not getting anything. Well, how about if I change this to contains? Because I have Windows VDI, right? Which contains Microsoft Windows. If I click on this two inventory items, let this screen render for a minute, you'll see that I have two VDI workstations, and they are MS Windows 10 Pro. So what I'm going to ask Tetration is, hey, anytime something contains MS Windows, consider it an MS Windows machine. Or, because I also have Windows servers, right? So I'm going to say OS contains, and we'll say MS server. You'll notice that this changed to 3. So let me close this window here. Let's click this again, and let's ask Tetration what it's essentially building for us. And you'll see here that it says, okay, good. I have your Windows Terminal Server 1864, right? This is a 2016 box. And I have your two VDI machines. These are the Windows machines within my environment. I'm happy with that. I'm going to say save. I'm going to say okay. So now what I'm doing is I'm building a policy based on operating system. My jump box can see Microsoft Windows, but on what port? Well, I'm going to say 3389. Awesome. So now my jump box can reach my Windows servers, but only on 3389. I'm going to do the same exact policy, but I'm going to do this based on my CentOS machines. So we'll go ahead and we'll say create another filter. We'll say CentOS or CentOS, and we'll say if the OS, the operating system, contains Cent. And you'll see here that I have 20, again, search the entire lab. I have 20 machines that contain Cent. We'll say save, and we're only going to allow SSH, so we'll say 22. Now, what's interesting here is that this may end up blocking a lot of our Windows admins, or I'm sorry, a lot of our Linux admins that still are hell-bent on using Telnet. Well, that's okay, because we can use Tetration's policy analysis to make sure that we're blocking what we want to block and we're allowing what we want to allow, right? We'll show that at the end of the video. Okay, now I'm going to build another policy here because I also have Ansible for some automation. So I'm going to say Ansible, I've pre-built this filter, but I have a problem, another problem. I only want Ansible to be able to access my data center servers. I do not want Ansible accessing my VDI environment. So I have to create a filter. I have to create a policy set, some dynamic attributes that say to Tetration, allow Ansible to reach everything in the data center except for VDI. Well, let's see what we can do. Let's say create a new filter, and let's call this data center servers, and we'll say only DC servers, not VDI. Now, what can we do? Well, I happen to know if I come over here, if I look at the criteria of my machines, I'll notice that my VDI machines are Windows 10, and they also have VDI in the host name. Well, I don't want those, so let's exclude them. Let's say host name doesn't contain VDI. And OS doesn't contain Windows 10. So now what we're asking Tetration to do is exclude anything that has VDI in the host name or Windows 10. But I also want to be able to include everything else. So we'll say and address equals, and we're going to go ahead and add our RFC 1918 space. So we're going to say 172.16.0.0/12 and learn how to spell JP, not AMF, and address equals 192.168.0.0/16. and oh, this should be or actually. Okay. Or what am I missing? 10.0.0. Oops, sorry. I'm going too quick here. Or address equals 10.0.0.0/8. So now you can see that Tetration is saying, okay, I have filtered out everything that has VDI. I have filtered out everything that has Windows 10 in the operating system, and I'm listing everything that is within your RFC 1918 space. If I click on the 190 machines that are now being listed in my lab, Tetration is going to spit them out for me. And as I go through this list, I should never see anything that has VDI in the host name. So let's say, okay. Now my Ansible needs access on port 22 for SSH, and it needs access to 5986. This is for some of the automated processes that we have. Now again, I can validate that this rule is correct by clicking data center servers, clicking workloads here for 190 and scrolling down and saying, okay, do I see anything that has VDI in the host name, right? Now, I have a small lab, so it's easy for me to do this, but you can do the same thing by clicking that inventory item and looking here and searching for anything that has it in the host name. Tetration will show you exactly what it's going to include in that group. So here's every server, every machine within my environment, including my terminal server. So Ansible is going to be able to access every server, whether it's CentOS or Windows, except for anything that's VDI, right? Which is kind of cool. Now I'm going to create another filter because I want to make sure that I allow my authenticated users access to my environment. Now I don't think I have a rule or a filter called authenticated users. I have unauthenticated, but I want to allow authenticated users only, and I want to do this based on SGT. So I'm going to say authenticated users, and I'm going to go down here and I want to try to figure out what I'm going to add, right? So I have, again, I remember that I have ICE integration. And so I'm going to see if I can go ahead and leverage some of those ICE attributes that I'm bringing in. So, well, look at this, security group. If the ICE security group equals employee, hopefully we spell employee correctly. I'm missing an E there, right? So there's one workload under employee that's currently logged into my environment, or I also have a CMDB or IPAM or DNS. Maybe I have a DNS zone that's labeled authenticated users, and it allows that DNS zone, because we have that integration, maybe we want to say, look, Tetration, if that environment coming from IPAM or coming from DNS or coming from whatever equals authenticated users, maybe we want to allow access, right? So at this point, we're telling Tetration if the security group tag is employee or the environment is authenticated users, which now is 7 machines, we want to allow access to this environment. So this is really easy for us to start building out policies. We'll say save. And what do we want to allow them to access? Well, we want to allow them to access anything that's in the data center except for VDI, because we don't want our campus users being able to get to our VDI machines very easily. We want them to maybe go through a portal. So what I'm going to do here is I'm only going to allow my authenticated users to hit my data center servers with web traffic. Now again, this is high level. So we could limit this if we wanted to. We could limit this to only, we could limit this to anything. In this case, we're saying if you're an authenticated user, you're allowed access to the data center. And then as we get into microsegmenting each individual application, we'll then allow or deny SSH or 443 or whatever we don't want to allow. But at a high level, at the edge of the data center, this is what we're going to ask Tetration to do. Now, I have one last policy that I want to create here before we go and analyze this and enforce it. I want to create a policy based on IoT devices. We have a bazillion iPhones and Galaxies and all sorts of weird stuff in our environment. We want to create a policy based on IoT. So let's go ahead and say add policy. Now, I already have an IoT group, or at least I should have an IoT group somewhere in here. I don't know if I deleted it, and I did delete it. So let's create a new one. This way you can see how it works. So we'll say create a group, IoT. I like it when it has a little I and a little O. So we'll say IoT. Now, again, what we're going to do is we are going to use ICE to determine whether these are IoT devices that we want to allow, right? So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to type ICE here in the query box, and we're going to pull up all of these security groups that we're pulling in from ICE. So we'll say if the security group equals, my machine is slowing down here, so we'll say equals IoT, and because we want to be able to create multiple different criterias here, so we don't just want to base this on one attribute, because we don't just want to allow every single iPhone or every single machine into our environment. We're also going to make sure that it's MDM compliant. So again, after and, we're going to look for any of those ICE SGTs. So let's see here. We'll say MDM compliant, and we're going to want to make sure that this equals true, because again, we want to make sure that it is in fact MDM compliant. So we'll say if it equals true. Whoops, I spelled that wrong. All right, there we go. So now I finally figured out how to spell true. Now, at the moment, I don't have any IoT devices that are authenticating to my network, so you're going to see 0 here. So we'll go ahead and say save. And I want these IoT devices, again, access to my data center. So I'll go ahead and I'll just type in data center here. And Tetration is going to be nice enough and smart enough to start pulling together the filters that I've already created that are based on the data center. Now, again, I don't want everybody in the world to be able to access every single resource in the data center, on any port they want. So I'll go ahead and I'll say port 80, and I'll go ahead and add another port for 443, because I only want these devices to be able to access web ports within my data center. So at this point, I have a pretty good policy set within my environment, a pretty good policy set at a high level. Again, I have prod can only talk to prod. My P2 compliance can only talk to P2 compliance. My jump box is able to access my Linux and my Windows servers on the appropriate ports. My Ansible is able to access my data center servers on the appropriate management ports. And then I have authenticated users, and my IoT devices are able to access my data center resources, but only via web traffic. Now, again, I don't just want to go and enforce this. I don't just want to go and say, okay, good, this looks fantastic, let's go and enforce it. No, I want to make sure that it's right. So what I can do is I can come over here to policy analysis within Tetration, and I can ask Tetration to show me or analyze my policy. And I can ask it to do this in the past, or I can ask this to do this going forward. So for example, you'll notice here that I have data going all the way back. So I can select this period, this time period here, going all the way back to October if I wanted to. And I could see, so I could, based on my policy right now, if I wanted to, I could select this point in time back on October 15th of last year. And I could ask Tetration, okay, what would this policy have broken last year if I actually deployed it? So I now have the ability to make sure that these new policies that I'm putting in are not going to break something that, we had functioning a year ago. Think about month end within our business unit, right? So I can now make sure that my application policy is correct. But in order to enforce this, all I need to do is come over here to the Enforce tab, and I need to click Enforce Policies. What this will do is this will take the 11 policies that I've created, and it will enforce them down to the individual workloads within my environment. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and click Enforce. Once I click Enforce, Tetration does have rollback control. So it is going to ask me which version of the policies do you want to put in. This is the latest version. It's the only version. It tells me this is policy number 1. It's going to give me some details here. It's going to say that you have 51 enforcement agents. Are you sure you want to actually enforce this policy? I'm going to go ahead and say accept and enforce. Now I'm going to pause the video here, and we'll come back in a minute or two, and we'll see these policies actually pushed down to these endpoints. All right, so it's been about 2 minutes. I probably should have kicked off the timer that I've done in other videos. If you don't believe me, you can go and you can watch, I think it's the application segmentation video that I have on YouTube, if you don't believe me how long it takes. But it's been about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I want to check my various different servers. So I have a demo app here. This is my finance app that we can't break. I'm also going to check my VDI machines. So let's go ahead and let's open up the VDI machines in another tab. What I'm looking for is I'm going to go into what we call the workspace, not the workspace, the profile of one of these VDI machines. Let's pick on 53. And we'll go to the policies tab and we'll see if Tetration is accurately allowing traffic. So we'll see that Guacamole is allowed on port 3389 to manage this particular Windows endpoint. So that's good news. I also want to look at my demo app. So what I'm going to do is let's open up my demo app in another tab. And these are all CentOS servers. So if I go click on the web server here, let's say 243, you'll see that this guy's a CentOS 7.6. Let's go to policies, and let's see what kind of policies were enforced down here. So here we see a little bit more because we were categorizing this particular web server as something very different. So this web server is considered P2 compliant because it has financial data. It is included in the production rule set. It also needs to be managed by Ansible and Guacamole, and authenticated users are allowed access via port 80 or 443. So you can see that all of these rules here, I mean, we don't have any traffic going on right now on this particular rule set. But what's cool is that, as you just saw, if I go in and I click that rule, Tetration will say, okay, here's how much traffic you actually have going on that rule. If I say fetch all stats, what Tetration will do is start fetching how many times that particular rule has been hit. Now, imagine a system that not only has the ability to dynamically enforce your policies, but a system that has the ability to tell you if those rules are actually needed or if they are completely stale. Imagine a way for you to easily look at all of the rules that are being deployed on a specific server, endpoint, application, environment, production, whatever, and see how many rules are stale, how many rules you can remove, how many rules are pointless, right? So this is a really easy way for you to be able to do this. So Tetration has all of this in one. So we see all the rules that have been accurately pushed down to our demo app, our finance environment. We see the rules that have been pushed down to, this is our finance environment. These are our Windows servers for VDI. What we need to do now is we need to make sure, and we're going to close this. Let's actually copy this IP address because I don't remember what it is. Let's copy this. Let's close down our app. We obviously still have access to our Guacamole jump box. Let's go ahead and let's type in the IP address of our application, and we see that the application still seems to work. Let's log in again. In fact, let's type the wrong password. Let's type 123456. And in theory, it should tell us it's wrong. Let's type the right password. Lets us in. Let's go ahead and let's go to products, and I don't know, let's delete a product. Let's delete test 1. Let's see if it actually goes away. Okay, so we have successfully segmented our data center at a high level using 11 different absolute policies. Again, IoT is allowed to access our data center as long as IoT. You know what? Let's add another one. Let's edit this filter, and let's say and. So we'll say not only do we want to look for that it's been categorized as an IoT device in a security group, and we want to make sure that it's MDM compliant. Let's also look at what other ICE attributes we have. Let's actually look at jailbroken. Let's make sure that it's not jailbroken. We'll say save. So now, if that IoT device is put into the right security group, it's MDM compliant, and it's not jailbroken, we're going to go ahead and we're going to consider it an allowed IoT device. Authenticated users. As long as you're in the security group employee, meaning you've authenticated to the network and you're allowed in the right security group, or you're in the right DNS zone, authenticated users, or the right environment, you're going to be allowed access to the data center on port 80 and 443. Ansible is going to be allowed to manage our data center servers. Our Jumpbox Guacamole is going to be allowed remote desktop only to Windows servers and SSH only to CentOS servers. And then again, prod and P2 are only going to be able to access their respective environments, meaning if you're P2 but dev, you can't access prod. If you're dev, you can't access P2 and vice versa. So here we've allowed ourselves to pretty easily segment our data center. In the next video, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a VDI policy set that's going to be pretty cool and based on software packages. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. Bye-bye.